the CEO of Credit Suisse, Ulrich Körner, stressed the bank's strength and is at a critical moment right before the latest overhaul. Shares are hovering at a record low for one of the largest financial institutions in the US, and the CEO told his employees not to worry. Don't swipe or click away, because here is why we have 8.5% inflation. But the worst is yet to come. Peter Schiff has been warning us about a recession for years now. Ray Dalio, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and even the Financial Times are warning us about the next big crash. Wall Street analysts have been touting this for the past 3 years. And now, financial YouTube channels like Graham Stephan and Andre Geek, along with lots of Redditors, are saying the exact same thing. People can see the effects of inflation firsthand. Every time they pump gas and go to the grocery store, they are reminded of the upcoming recession, and they want to know what's going to happen with the global economy. Back in March of this year, the inflation rate rose to a high not seen since the start of the 80s. This marked the fastest 12-month increase in recent history. For example, in March alone, there was a 1.2% spike in the interest rate. So where is all this inflation coming from? Is it the government? Is it businesses? Is it the global economy? Well, to tell you the truth, it's a little bit of all three. It all started with the COVID-19 crisis in 2020. Since then, governments have been over-leveraged like never before. Supply shortages were everywhere since people couldn't go to work. Still, economists were positive that the economy would all pick up once the pandemic was through. However, as soon as the world started to come back to normal, there was another blow. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the subsequent sanctions on the economy have made matters much worse than they were. About half of the inflation in the US came as a result of Russia's response to the EU and US sanctions imposed on the country. In other words, when the West banned all major US and EU brands from Russia, Russia cut off the oil and gas supply. The rise in the price of gas by 18.3% almost tripled the pace of the inflation we saw in February. That same month, food prices rose to unprecedented levels. Is this stemming from the Russian invasion of Ukraine as well? Well, we have to remember that Ukraine and Russia were the major exporters of wheat and grain in the world. As the shortage of these staple foods increased while the war was raging on, prices at supermarkets for goods started going through the roof. The price of bread, milk, eggs, and oil was going up. When food staples like these are increasing in price, the rest of the products will smash that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, the rest of the products will soon follow suit. For example, in the US, the stores racked up a 1.5% increase in prices in March. And the worst thing is, it's not just the US. The entire world is feeling the effect of this, as food prices are going through the roof. And many analysts and economists thought that this would be the end of it. When they saw that the inflation in March rose to only 0.3%, that was substantially lower compared to February, when the inflation rose by 0.5%. So they assumed that inflation had hit its peak. We thought the world would go back to normal. However, if we go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, we will see that the price of food has risen 11.4% compared to last year. Energy prices are up by an astounding 23.8%. And the Consumer Price Index is up by 1% in August of 2022. But as time went on, economists and analysts realized that we might be in for a rough ride. Even though inflation has decreased by 2% and currently stands at 8.3%, we need to remember that this is still the highest it's been in 40 years. On top of that, the average person is constantly seeing their grocery bills and the cost of living on the rise. Wages are unable to keep pace with inflation. And while employers are trying to increase wages in an attempt to attract more workers for all of the vacant job positions they have, things have not gotten better. Sure, the wages have increased by a small percentage, but the inflation is so high that it's eating all of that up in no time. If you were to consider the real earnings measure, the BLS said that wages are down 2.7% compared to March of last year. Oh, but that's not the worst thing. Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank are on the brink of collapse, according to major news publications like the Financial Times. And Redditors were quick to point out that this is eerily similar to what happened in 2008 with the credit default swaps. For example, the global systematically important banks are said to have low capital buffers to weather the storm. Deutsche Bank has a 2% capital buffer, and Credit Suisse is in a worse position with only a 1% capital buffer. And these are the banks that are designated to be SIFI, or systematically important financial institutions. That's just a fancy word for saying the government has deemed these banks as too big to fail. What does that mean? Well, it means that if these banks were to fail, their effect on the global economy would have a greater impact than if the government were to bail them out. And if the time comes, they will do so. But wait a second, what is the capital buffer we keep talking about? Well, it all starts with credit default swaps. Think of these as insurance-owned loans. If consumer A goes to Bank A to get a mortgage loan, that bank can issue a credit default swap. Then, Bank B will buy the credit default swap and take on all the risk, but Bank A agrees to pay it a monthly fee for doing so. If, for some reason, consumer A bails on their loan and they can't pay it anymore, Bank A will tell Bank B to pay them for the credit default swap. Now, this is not a problem if the bank has only a few CDSs, or taking on other CDSs from other banks. They are collecting enough premiums to offset the risk of default. On top of that, Bank B will get the house, the sale of which would cover the premium they had to pay for the CDS to Bank A. Now, the problem comes when Bank B buys too many CDSs and they become over-leveraged. If a lot of consumers default on their loans, then the bank needs to raise a lot of capital. For example, Credit Suisse will have to raise about $4 billion to stay afloat. But getting that money is more difficult than they thought. When they started doing so, people started looking at their financials, and they found a lot of problems. Some investors even went so far as to say that the bank was bankrupt, and it was only a matter of time before it goes under. They need a lot of capital to meet their credit default swap obligations to other banks. Money the bank doesn't really have. On top of that, they have lost about $6.5 billion on the Citrix investment. They could be laying off about 5,000 employees, and they are on course to lose $800 billion from the Singapore trial. This is a lot like the 2008 crisis when Lehman Brothers, one of the oldest banks on Wall Street, went under and took another 75 financial institutions down with it. Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank are 4 times larger than Lehman Brothers was in 2008. And if they go under, we can't even imagine what would happen to the global economy. So if their buffer capital of $100 billion doesn't serve them well, we could be seeing another major government bailout and an increase in the national debt, which will only spell trouble in the years to come. On a related note, what do you think will happen to Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank? You can tell us in the comments section below. If you like more videos like these, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of them. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.